People talk about Elvis Presley a lot, his music, his hips, his impact on culture. But sometimes, we forget about the numbers, the sheer scale of money involved. RCA Records, they bought Elvis from Sun Records for $35,000 back in 1955. That sounds like a big number for a young kid even then. But what did that investment actually become? How many zeros did RCA add to its bank account because of him? Think about it. Elvis put out more than 100 singles that sold over 1 million copies each. More than 150 albums that went gold, platinum, or multi-platinum. He sold over 1 billion records worldwide. In 1 billion. That's not just a record, it's an economic earthquake. What did it cost RCA to get that earthquake started, and how did they manage the tremors for decades? How did his career, his films, his merchandise, his comebacks, and even his death all translate into money for the record company? And what do they really know they were getting into? These are some of the questions we should ask. Or number 19, what was the true value of the RCA Sun Records transaction? In 1955, a deal went down that changed music forever. RCA Victor, a giant in the record industry, bought Elvis Presley's contract from Sam Phillips' Sun Records. The price was $35,000. This wasn't just pocket change then. To put it in perspective, $35,000 in 1955 is roughly equivalent to over $380,000 today when you adjust for inflation. It was a substantial sum, especially for a young artist who had only released a handful of singles, even if those singles were burning up the regional charts. Sam Phillips, the owner of Sun Records, was a shrewd businessman. He had nurtured Elvis, recorded his first songs, and understood his raw, untamed talent. But Sun Records was a small, independent label. It didn't have the distribution network, the marketing muscle, or the financial backing to truly launch Elvis onto a national or even international stage. RCA, on the other hand, had all of that. They were a corporate behemoth, part of the much larger Radio Corporation of America. The sale included Elvis's existing master recordings with Sun, all 5 singles he had released there. It also included his recording contract itself. This meant RCA would take over all future recording with him. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, was instrumental in brokering this deal. He knew Elvis needed a bigger platform. He pushed for RCA, seeing their potential to make Elvis a household name. He saw the big picture, maybe even bigger than RCA did at first. RCA was initially a bit hesitant. Some executives questioned the price. They saw Elvis as a regional phenomenon, not necessarily a national one. Much his music was, too. Country for some, too, rhythm and blues for others. It didn't fit neatly into existing categories. But one man, Steve Sholes, RCA's A&R chief, pushed hard for the signing. He saw the spark, the charisma, the raw talent. He saw the future. Sholes convinced his superiors that Elvis was worth the gamble. The $35,000 was split. Elvis got a $5,000 bonus. Sam Phillips received $25,000 for the contract and an additional $5,000 for the masters. This might seem like a lot for Phillips, but it allowed him to invest in other Sun artists like Johnny Cash and Jerry Lee Lewis. So it was a good deal for him too. For RCA, it was an unprecedented investment in a rock and roll artist. They had mostly focused on country and pop artists up until then. This purchase marked a major shift in their strategy. They were buying into a new emerging genre. They were betting on a cultural tidal wave. The quick returns were staggering. Elvis's first RCA single, Heartbreak Hotel, released in January 1956, sold over 1 million copies almost immediately. It went to #1 on the pop charts. This proved the $35,000 was not just a good investment, it was an incredibly shrewd one. It was a bargain. The initial outlay was dwarfed by the profits that started rolling in within months. RCA's stock price likely saw an indirect boost from the buzz and success. They had purchased a phenomenon. They got a global superstar for the price of a small house. What we still do not know, did RCA have internal projections on what Elvis could earn in that first year? What was the true internal debate like among RCA executives about the $35,000 price tag? Did any financial analysts at RCA predict the scale of his immediate success, or were they all surprised? Number 18, how did the initial RCA contract terms impact early profitability? The initial recording contract Elvis signed with RCA in November. 1955 was a standard deal for the time, but it had key implications for profitability. It wasn't just a simple payment, it set the structure for how royalties would be earned and distributed. Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, was a master negotiator, even early on. He ensured Elvis got a decent percentage, but the lion's share still went to RCA, which was typical for major labels. Elvis's royalty rate was set at 3% of the wholesale price of records sold. This was pretty standard for new artists then, sometimes even slightly generous for a newcomer. But wholesale prices are lower than retail prices, meaning the actual percentage of the sticker price was even smaller. For every 78 RPM or 45 RPM single sold, RCA kept the vast majority of the revenue. They covered manufacturing, distribution, marketing, and then paid Elvis his slice. The contract also typically included advances. An advance is money paid to an artist up front, which is then recouped by the record label from the artist's future royalties. If Elvis made $100,000 in royalties but had received a $10,000 advance, he would only start seeing money after that $10,000 was paid back to RCA through his earnings. We know Elvis received a $5,000 bonus as part of the Sun deal, which essentially acted as a non-recoupable payment, but further advances would have been part of the ongoing contract. A critical clause in many record contracts of that era, and likely Elvis's, involved a reserve for returns. Labels would withhold a percentage of royalties for records shipped but not yet sold, or for potential returns from distributors. This meant artists often didn't get their full due until months, sometimes a year or more, after the records were shipped. This practice greatly benefited the record company's cash flow. RCA's massive distribution network was the real game changer. Sun Records could get Elvis's records into regional stores, but RCA could put Heartbreak Hotel in every record shop, department store, and dime store across America, and quickly. This reach meant millions of records could be sold in a very short time, converting that 3% royalty into a substantial sum for Elvis, but an even larger one for RCA. The sheer volume made the low percentage immensely profitable for the label. The speed of Elvis's rise meant RCA started recouping any initial investments and advances almost instantly. Heartbreak Hotel sold over 300,000 copies in its first 3 weeks. Within a few months, it was a million seller. The profits from that single alone, even after paying Elvis his share and covering production, would have easily covered the $35,000 purchase price of his Sun contract and more. This early contract laid the groundwork for future negotiations. As Elvis's star power grew, the Colonel would push for better terms. But those initial terms, though seemingly modest for Elvis, were designed to maximize RCA's immediate return on their bold investment. They ensured that RCA was the primary beneficiary of Elvis's sudden explosion into the national consciousness. What we still do not know, what were the exact terms for future advances in that first RCA contract? How much did RCA profit from the reserve for returns clause on Elvis's early records? What internal accounting metrics did RCA use to track profitability on Elvis's first singles? Number 17, how did singles sales become RCA's immediate cash cow? Elvis Presley's singles were pure gold for RCA. From Heartbreak Hotel onward, nearly every single he released in the 1950s was a massive hit. These little 45 RPM records, costing maybe 99 cents or a dollar each, flew off the shelves. This wasn't just about music, it was about volume, speed, and market penetration. Heartbreak Hotel sold over 1 million copies within months of its release in January 1956. And then came I Want You, I Need You, I Love You, selling another 1 million. Hound Dog and Don't Be Cruel were released as a double-A side single, and that release alone sold over 3 million copies by the end of 1956. This pattern continued with Love Me Tender, All Shook Up, and many others. RCA benefited hugely from the singles market. In the 1950s, singles were the primary way people bought music. Albums were around, but singles were king, especially for teenagers who might not have had a lot of money. They could afford a single. Record players were becoming common in homes, and jukeboxes in diners and soda fountains needed a constant supply of new hits. Elvis provided those hits, one after another. The economics of singles were clear. Manufacturing costs were low compared to albums. Distribution was efficient. Radio airplay was massive. Every time a DJ spun an Elvis record, it was free advertising for RCA. Teenagers would hear it, rush to the store and buy it. This created a rapid turnover of inventory and a constant flow of cash into RCA's coffers. RCA had an unparalleled distribution network. They could press millions of copies quickly and get them to every corner of the country. This wasn't just about stores in big cities, it was about small towns too. The sheer logistical power of RCA meant Elvis's music was everywhere, immediately. This was a critical advantage over smaller labels. The marketing for singles was also relatively straightforward. A focus on radio, get those records to DJs, put up some posters. Elvis himself was the ultimate marketing tool. His TV appearances on the Dorsey Brothers stage show, Milton Berle show, and especially the Ed Sullivan show created enormous demand. After his first appearance on Sullivan in September 1956, Don't Be Cruel, and Hound Dog sales spiked dramatically. People saw him, they heard him, and they wanted his music. RCA was there to meet that demand. This incredible run of hit singles was the backbone of RCA's early financial success with Elvis. It established him as a consistent, bankable artist. It proved the initial investment was not just justified, but spectacularly profitable. These singles were not just songs, they were financial assets that spun money for RCA at an unbelievable rate, setting a precedent for rock and roll profitability. What we still do not know, what was the fastest a single of Elvis's went platinum for RCA in the 1950s? How much did RCA spend on radio promotions, specifically for Elvis's singles in 1956 to 1957? Did RCA have specific sales targets for each Elvis single release, and how often did he exceed them? Number 16, how did albums become a long-term revenue stream for RCA? While singles were the immediate cash cow, albums, especially LPs, turned into a much more significant and long-term revenue stream for RCA. In the 1950s, albums were generally for older, more established artists or for classical music. The rock and roll was seen as a singles medium, but Elvis changed that too. RCA released his self-titled debut album, Elvis Presley, in March 1956. It was a mix of Sun Era leftovers and new RCA recordings. It quickly topped the Billboard Pop Album chart and became the first rock and roll album to sell over 1 million copies. This showed RCA that Elvis wasn't just a singles artist, he could sell albums too. And albums were more profitable per unit than singles. They cost more, so RCA's revenue share was proportionally higher. Albums allowed RCA to package multiple songs together. They could include the hit singles, but also B-sides and deeper cuts that fans wanted. This gave consumers more value and encouraged them to spend more money. As Elvis's career progressed, albums became even more important. After his initial explosion, his album releases became events. During his army service from 1958 to 1960, RCA continued to release albums, often compilations of unreleased material or existing hits. This kept his name in the public eye and the cash registers ringing, even when he wasn't actively recording new material. Elvis is Back in 1960, upon his return, was a huge seller and signaled a new phase of his career, heavily focused on LPs. The soundtrack albums from his movies were another critical component of RCA's album strategy. In films like G Blues, Blue Hawaii, and Girls, all had accompanying soundtrack albums. Blue Hawaii, in particular, was a monumental success, spending 20 weeks at #1 on the Billboard album chart in 1961. These albums often contained both popular and less memorable songs, but the movie tie-in drove sales. This synergy between film and music was highly profitable for RCA. Albums also had a longer shelf life. While singles would fade from the charts, popular albums could remain available and sell steadily for years. This catalog value became increasingly important over time. RCA could repackage albums, create best-of compilations, and re-release them periodically. This meant that once an album was produced, it could continue generating revenue with minimal additional cost. This transformed Elvis's recordings into enduring financial assets for the company. The shift to album-centric sales was a major economic trend in the music industry, and Elvis, with RCA's backing, was at the forefront of it. RCA saw the potential for long-term, sustained income through albums, complementing the immediate burst from singles. This strategy ensured Elvis remained a consistent revenue generator for decades. What we still do not know, what was RCA's typical profit margin on an Elvis LP compared to a single in the late 1950s? How much revenue did RCA estimate they gained from repackaging older Elvis material into new albums during the 1960s? Did RCA track the average listening habits of Elvis album buyers versus single buyers, and did that influence marketing? Number 15, how did merchandising extend RCA's profit beyond music? Elvis Presley was not just a musician, he was a brand, and RCA, along with Colonel Tom Parker, understood this early on. Merchandising became a significant economic extension of RCA's initial investment in Elvis, pushing profit beyond just record sales. It turned Elvis's image into a marketable commodity. The idea of artist merchandising was not new, but Elvis took it to an unprecedented level. In 1956, Colonel Parker signed licensing deals that put Elvis's name and likeness on an incredible array of products. This included everything from guitars and record players to lipsticks, stationery, clothes, and even Elvis-branded bubblegum cards. The sheer volume and variety were staggering. While Parker managed these licensing deals, RCA benefited indirectly and sometimes directly. Many of the products were music-related: Elvis Presley guitars, record players, and songbooks. These sales reinforced his musical brand, encouraging record purchases, but even non-music items like his famous Wiggle Hips dolls or dog tags built brand awareness and kept Elvis visible in the marketplace, which in turn boosted record sales. RCA, as the record label, was the central hub for his music, and all these merchandise items often featured his songs or his albums prominently. For example, a Love Me Tender branded product would naturally lead consumers to RCA's record of the song. The merchandise also helped solidify Elvis's image as a youth icon, making his music more appealing to his target audience. The financial arrangement for merchandising was complex. Colonel Parker's company, Elvis Presley Enterprises (EPE), handled the bulk of the licensing. EPE would negotiate with manufacturers, taking a percentage of the sales. This was a separate revenue stream from record royalties, but it was intrinsically linked to RCA's success in promoting Elvis's music. The more records RCA sold, the bigger Elvis's fame, and the more valuable his name became for merchandising. In the first year alone, 1956, EPE reportedly generated over $22 million in gross sales from merchandise. This was an astonishing figure for the time. While RCA didn't directly receive a cut of every single merchandise sale, the halo effect was undeniable. RCA's primary investment was in the music, but that music was the engine that drove the merchandising machine. The widespread presence of Elvis merchandise in stores reinforced his ubiquity and cultural dominance, pushing more people to buy his records. This merchandising also diversified the revenue streams tied to Elvis. If record sales dipped temporarily, merchandise sales could still bring in money. It was a smart strategy for maximizing the financial potential of a superstar. It showed how a record company's investment in an artist could yield profits far beyond just music sales, by leveraging the artist's entire persona as a commercial entity. What we still do not know is the specific financial agreement, if any, between RCA and EPE regarding cross-promotion or shared revenue from merchandise featuring RCA album covers. Did RCA ever consider direct investment in Elvis Presley Enterprises, or did they prefer to keep those revenue streams separate? How did the sales of RCA manufactured Elvis record players compare to his record sales, and what was their profit margin? Number 14, what was the economic impact of film soundtracks on RCA's sales? In Elvis Presley's movie career, spanning 31 films from 1956 to 1969, was a massive economic engine for RCA, particularly through the soundtrack albums. These films, while often critically panned, were huge commercial successes and directly fueled RCA's music sales. And Colonel Parker had a vision use films to keep Elvis in the public eye and sell records. The deal for the movie soundtracks was usually that RCA would release the accompanying album. This meant a guaranteed release schedule for Elvis's music, often 2 to 3 albums a year during his peak film period. The movies provided built-in marketing. Audiences would see Elvis sing a song in the film, then rush to buy the soundtrack album to hear it again. Films like Jailhouse Rock 1957, King Creole 1958, and especially G.I. Blues 1960 and Blue Hawaii 1961 generated enormous soundtrack sales. Blue Hawaii spent 20 weeks at #1 on the Billboard album charts in 1961 and 1962. It sold over 3 million copies by 1962, becoming one of RCA's biggest selling albums ever at that point. The revenue from these albums was substantial for RCA. The structure of these deals was generally favorable to RCA. While Elvis would receive his agreed-upon royalties, RCA owned the masters. The cost of recording the songs for the films was part of RCA's overall production budget, but the films themselves provided the promotional platform. The studio paid Elvis for his acting, but RCA reaped the benefits of increased music sales. It was a powerful synergy. Sometimes the songs weren't even particularly strong, but the film's popularity guaranteed sales. This allowed RCA to release a steady stream of product without relying solely on single hits. It filled their release calendar and kept Elvis's presence consistent in record stores. This was crucial during his army stint and the period where his musical direction became more geared towards film demands. Film soundtracks also diversified RCA's catalog. They weren't just pop or rock albums, they were soundtracks appealing to a slightly broader audience who enjoyed the movies. This expanded Elvis's market reach. The films were often set in exotic locations or had compelling storylines, which added to the allure of the music. By the mid-1960s, the quality of the films and the music began to decline, leading to some dip in enthusiasm. But even then, the albums still sold hundreds of thousands of copies, which was still profitable for RCA. The system kept working. The soundtracks provided a reliable source of income for RCA for over a decade, proving the power of cross-media promotion for a superstar. But we still do not know. What was the precise breakdown of profits for RCA between pure singles albums and film soundtracks during Elvis's movie career? Did RCA have specific contractual obligations to release a certain number of soundtrack albums per year, or was it a fluid agreement? How did the declining critical reception of Elvis's films eventually impact RCA's budget for recording his movie songs? Number 13, how did publishing rights become a hidden goldmine for RCA and Colonel Parker? The world of music publishing rights is complex, but it became an incredibly lucrative area for RCA, though often indirectly thanks to Colonel Tom Parker's astute maneuvering. Publishing rights involve the ownership of a song's composition. The melody and lyrics started separate from the recording itself. This generates revenue from sales of sheet music, public performances, and use in films, TV, or commercials. Early in Elvis's career, Colonel Parker, always looking for new ways to make money, insisted that Elvis receive songwriting credits, or at least a share of the publishing rights, for songs he recorded. This was often done even if Elvis didn't actually write the song. The most famous example is the arrangement with Hill & Range, the major music publishing company that handled many of Elvis's songs. Parker negotiated a deal where Hill & Range would give up 50% of the publishing rights to a company called Aberbox, which was essentially a front for Parker and Elvis. So, on many of Elvis's early hits, even though he didn't compose them, he and Parker received a co-publishing credit, splitting the publishing royalties with the actual songwriters. This meant significant income beyond recording artist royalties. How did this benefit RCA? RCA was the record label, not directly the publisher. However, RCA was deeply intertwined with the entire ecosystem. First, RCA had an arrangement with Hill & Range. Hill & Range was a major publishing house, and by ensuring Elvis recorded their songs, RCA gained favor and access to their extensive catalog. This smoothed the process of finding material for Elvis. More importantly, the financial incentive for Parker and Elvis to record specific songs became a lever for RCA. If a song had publishing potential for Elvis Presley music, the publishing company associated with Elvis Parker, there was a strong motivation for RCA to record and push that song as a single or album track. This aligned interests. The more records RCA sold, the more performance and mechanical royalties were generated for the publishers, including Parker and Elvis. This arrangement meant that for every record sold, not only did RCA get the bulk of the sales revenue and Elvis his artist royalty, but Parker and Elvis also got a cut from the publishing side. This added millions to their combined income over the decades. It was a hidden goldmine operating quietly behind the scenes. Historians like Peter Guralnick in his extensive biographies of Elvis detail how this publishing scheme was a major point of contention and a source of immense wealth for Parker. It ensured that even if a song wasn't a huge hit, it still generated publishing income every time it was played on the radio, in a movie, or pressed onto a record. RCA benefited from having a highly motivated management team, Parker, who were financially invested in the success of every song Elvis recorded. It created a powerful, self-reinforcing profit engine. What we still do not know, what was RCA's exact financial or preferential arrangement with Hill & Range regarding Elvis's recordings? Did RCA ever express concern about the ethics of Elvis receiving co-publishing credit without writing songs? Or was it simply accepted as the cost of doing business with Parker? How much did RCA indirectly profit from its close relationship with the entities that controlled Elvis's publishing rights? Number 12. How did international market penetration boost RCA's global profits? Elvis Presley wasn't just big in America. He was a global phenomenon, and RCA capitalized on this massively. International market penetration became a crucial economic frontier for the company, transforming Elvis from a national star into a worldwide moneymaker. RCA had the infrastructure to make this happen. Even before his first US #1, Heartbreak Hotel, Elvis's earlier Sun singles had started to find their way to other countries. But with RCA's global reach, his music exploded across continents. RCA had affiliates and distribution networks in Europe, Asia, and Australia. This meant that when Heartbreak Hotel hit big in the US, it was simultaneously being pushed in the UK, Germany, Japan, and beyond. The early sales figures from countries like the UK were remarkable. Elvis's first RCA single, Heartbreak Hotel, was a top 3 hit there. Subsequent singles like Hound Dog and Jailhouse Rock went straight to #1 in the UK. This pattern repeated in many other countries. His first album also topped charts globally. The economic impact for RCA was immense. Each record sold internationally generated revenue. While the profit margins might have varied slightly due to local taxes, currency exchange rates, and different distribution costs, the sheer volume of sales added millions to RCA's bottom line. International sales were not just a bonus, they became a substantial, integral part of RCA's overall profitability from Elvis. RCA adapted its marketing strategies for different markets, but the core product, Elvis's music and image, transcended cultural barriers. His films were also shown internationally, further driving soundtrack and record sales worldwide. For example, Blue Hawaii was a hit globally, ensuring its soundtrack album was a bestseller in numerous countries. The long-term impact of international sales was also significant. Elvis's catalog continued to sell well globally for decades. Compilations, re-releases, and greatest hits albums found eager audiences in every corner of the world. This meant a constant, steady stream of revenue for RCA long after the initial buzz of new releases faded. When Elvis passed away in 1977, the surge in global sales was enormous, cementing his status as a truly international superstar and further enriching RCA. RCA's commitment to promoting Elvis abroad was a testament to their foresight. They understood that global reach meant global profits. Their existing international infrastructure, combined with Elvis's universal appeal, created an economic powerhouse that continues to generate revenue for the company's catalog division to this day. Elvis was one of the first truly global music phenomena, and RCA was the conduit for that reach. But we still do not know what was RCA's most profitable international market for Elvis outside of North America in the 1960s. Did RCA encounter any significant legal or cultural barriers to selling Elvis's records in certain countries, and how did that affect their strategy? How did RCA's international marketing budget for Elvis compare to their domestic budget in its prime? Number 11. What was RCA's investment in studio and recording technology for Elvis? Recording music costs money. For an artist like Elvis, RCA made significant investments in studio time, engineers, musicians, and the cutting-edge recording technology of the era. This was a crucial part of their economic history with Elvis, as these investments were necessary to create the product they would then sell for millions. In the mid-1950s, recording technology was evolving. RCA Victor had some of the best studios in the country, particularly their Nashville and New York studios. These weren't cheap to run. When Elvis first joined RCA, recordings were still largely monaural. But as stereo technology emerged in the late 1950s, RCA was at the forefront. They invested in new equipment, new mixing consoles, and new recording techniques to capture Elvis's sound in stereo. This transition was a costly but necessary upgrade. Each recording session required payment for studio time, often by the hour. Then there were the session musicians. Elvis worked with some of the best: Scotty Moore on guitar, Bill Black on bass initially, DJ Fontana on drums, and later the Jordanaires for backing vocals. These musicians were paid union scale fees, which added up over hundreds of recording sessions. Their talent was essential to Elvis's sound, and RCA paid for it. The engineers, producers like Steve Scholes and later Felton Jarvis were also salaried employees or paid per session. Their expertise in capturing Elvis's voice and the band's energy was invaluable. RCA also covered the cost of tape mixing, mastering, and pressing the vinyl records. Every single step had a cost associated with it. RCA's investment in technology wasn't just about recording quality. It was also about efficiency. Their large studios allowed for faster recording, which meant more albums and singles could be produced. As Elvis's film career progressed, RCA often brought mobile recording units directly to movie sets to capture the soundtrack material, which was a logistical and financial undertaking. This showed their commitment to a continuous flow of Elvis product. The jump from mono to stereo recording in the late 1950s and early 1960s was a particularly large capital expenditure for RCA, but it allowed them to release new higher fidelity versions of Elvis's music and also to re-release older mono tracks in electronically reprocessed stereo versions, which generated new sales. This investment in audio quality was a selling point for consumers and kept RCA at the cutting edge of music production. Ultimately, these investments in studios, personnel, and technology were the foundation of RCA's profit machine. Without quality recordings, there would be no records to sell. RCA understood this. Their willingness to commit significant resources to Elvis's sound ensured they had a top-tier product to market to the world. What we still do not know, what was RCA's approximate annual budget for Elvis's recording sessions during his peak film years early 1960s? Did RCA ever conduct a cost-benefit analysis comparing its older mono recording processes to its newer stereo capabilities? How much did RCA invest in sound engineers specifically trained to work with Elvis and his unique style? Number 10. What were RCA's marketing and promotional budgets for Elvis? RCA didn't just record Elvis, they relentlessly promoted him. Their marketing and promotional budgets for Elvis were massive, especially in the early years. This was an essential investment to convert potential listeners into record buyers. RCA understood that even a superstar needed a significant push to achieve maximum market penetration. In 1956, when Elvis exploded, RCA leveraged every available medium. They sent promotional copies of singles to radio stations nationwide, ensuring heavy airplay. Radio was the lifeblood of music promotion then, and getting a song into rotation meant instant exposure to millions. RCA's strong relationships with radio stations and their network of regional promoters were invaluable. Television was another key area. RCA secured those landmark appearances on Stage Show, Milton Berle Show, and the Ed Sullivan Show. While these were primarily for public exposure, there were often costs associated with booking, travel, and ensuring RCA's brand was linked to these appearances. The sheer reach of these shows, with tens of millions of viewers, made them incredibly effective, almost free advertising for RCA's records. They ran advertisements in trade publications like Billboard and Cashbox, announcing new releases and charting success. They also placed ads in youth magazines and newspapers, targeting Elvis's core demographic. What point-of-sale displays in record stores were common, with posters and cardboard cutouts of Elvis urging fans to buy his latest single or album. Film tie-ins were a huge part of the promotional strategy. Every movie was a multi-million-dollar commercial for the soundtrack album. RCA worked closely with the film studios to synchronize releases and maximize the cross-promotional potential. The films themselves were massive marketing vehicles. Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, was also a master of promotion. While he orchestrated many campaigns, RCA would often financially support or amplify these efforts. They supplied promotional materials, funded special events, and ensured that Elvis's image was consistent across all media. They even helped manage the merchandising blitz, understanding that visibility, in any form, led back to record sales. As Elvis's career continued, especially during his time in the Army, RCA maintained promotional efforts by releasing existing material and compilation albums. When he returned, the Elvis is Back campaign in 1960 was a massive coordinated effort. It included album releases, promotional tours, though Elvis didn't tour much then, and a huge media push. Later, the 1968 Comeback Special TV show was a monumental promotional event. RCA released the soundtrack album and heavily promoted it. The success of the special revived his career and led to a surge in sales across his entire catalog, proving the power of strategic, well-funded marketing. These marketing budgets were not just expenses, they were investments that generated exponential returns in record sales and overall brand value for RCA. What we still do not know. What was RCA's single largest marketing expenditure for Elvis in his first 5 years? How did RCA measure the ROI return on investment of its different promotional activities for Elvis, such as radio versus TV ads? Did RCA's marketing budget for Elvis fluctuate significantly during his less popular film years? And how did that impact sales? Number 9, what was the economic impact of the 68 comeback special on RCA's sales? By 1968, Elvis Presley's career was in a slump. He was making formulaic movies with equally formulaic soundtracks. His music wasn't hitting the charts like it used to. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and new rock acts dominated the airwaves. RCA and certainly Colonel Parker knew something big needed to happen. That something was the Singer Presents Elvis TV special, commonly known as the 68 Comeback Special. Its economic impact on RCA was profound, revitalizing his brand and his sales. The special, broadcast on NBC in December 1968, showed a raw, energetic Elvis clad in black leather performing intimate, intense sessions. It reminded everyone why he was a superstar. The critical and public reception was overwhelmingly positive. It was a massive ratings success for NBC. For RCA, it was a goldmine. First, RCA released the soundtrack album Elvis NBC TV Special. This album was a massive commercial success, reaching number 8 on the Billboard album charts. It was his highest charting album in years. This immediate sales boost was exactly what RCA needed. It proved Elvis could still sell records in a big way, outside of his movie soundtracks. The special also had a ripple effect across his entire catalog. Fans, new and old, rediscovered his earlier music. Sales of his classic singles and albums, which had plateaued, saw a significant surge. People wanted to hear the old Elvis and the new Elvis. RCA was perfectly positioned to capitalize on this, with a deep catalog ready for re-promotion. This revitalization encouraged RCA to change its approach to Elvis's music. He moved away from movie soundtracks and back into serious recording sessions. He went to American Sound Studio in Memphis and recorded tracks like Suspicious Minds and In the Ghetto, which became huge hits for RCA in 1969. These records might not have happened, or at least not with the same urgency, without the success of the comeback special. RCA invested in the special, though the primary financial backing came from the sponsor, Singer. RCA would have coordinated extensively, helped with music rights clearances, and certainly spent on promoting the soundtrack album. Their foresight in supporting this risky venture paid off handsomely. It demonstrated that a carefully planned, high-profile event could completely reset an artist's economic trajectory. The comeback special was a marketing masterstroke. It created a powerful narrative of redemption and return to form. This narrative fueled not just album sales, but also set the stage for Elvis's triumphant return to live performing in Las Vegas in 1969, which further generated album sales through live recordings. The economic impact was not just a one-time boost, but a sustained revitalization of the Elvis brand, which benefited RCA for years to come. What we still do not know, what was RCA's exact financial contribution to the production and promotion of the 68 comeback special beyond the soundtrack album? How much did RCA specifically track the increase in back catalog sales immediately following the special's broadcast? Did RCA anticipate the extent of the special's success, or were they pleasantly surprised by its impact? Number 8. How did the Vegas years in live album sales add to RCA's profits? After the success of the 68 comeback special, Elvis returned to live performing in a big way, famously at the International Hotel in Las Vegas in 1969. This ushered in a new era for Elvis, often called the Vegas years, and it became another significant revenue stream for RCA, primarily through live album sales. Elvis's return to the stage was a massive event. He performed 2 shows a night for a month, selling out every performance. The excitement was palpable. RCA was quick to capitalize on this. They dispatched their recording equipment to Las Vegas to capture these historic performances. The first live album from this era was From Memphis to Vegas. From Vegas to Memphis, released in 1969. The Vegas portion was recorded live in Las Vegas. This was followed by Onstage 1970, Elvis as recorded at Madison Square Garden 1972, and Aloha from Hawaii via satellite 1973, which was a global television phenomenon. These live albums were immensely popular. They offered fans a different side of Elvis, the showman, the performer, the man who could command an audience. They captured the energy and excitement of his concerts. For RCA, live albums were relatively cost-effective to produce. They still involved studio mixing and mastering, but the primary content was already performed. The big promotional push came from Elvis's concerts themselves. The live album strategy diversified RCA's Elvis catalog further. It allowed them to release new material regularly, even when Elvis wasn't in the studio recording traditional albums. It also allowed them to capture his evolving style and set lists. The sales figures for these albums were strong. Aloha from Hawaii, for instance, was a multi-platinum seller and became one of his best-selling albums during his lifetime. The Aloha from Hawaii special itself was an economic marvel. It was broadcast live via satellite to over 40 countries, with an estimated audience of over 1 billion people. This was an unprecedented global reach for a single artist. RCA released the album shortly after the broadcast, leveraging the massive promotional power of the TV special. The album was a commercial juggernaut, selling millions of copies worldwide and providing a huge boost to RCA's profits. The Vegas years and the subsequent touring were also good for RCA because they kept Elvis visible. His concerts were reviewed, talked about, and attended by thousands. This constant presence in the public eye ensured that demand for his records remained high. The live albums were a direct financial benefit, but the overall publicity from his performing career also contributed to the continued sales of his entire RCA catalog. It was a well-oiled machine, continually generating revenue for the record label. What we still do not know. What was the specific breakdown of costs for RCA to record and produce a live Elvis album compared to a studio album during the early 1970s? How much did RCA specifically invest in promoting the Aloha from Hawaii album post-broadcast? Did RCA consider the Vegas Elvis brand as a distinct economic entity within their broader Elvis strategy? Number 7, how did catalog sales and re-releases generate consistent income for RCA pre-death? Beyond new releases, Elvis's vast catalog of recordings became a perpetual revenue engine for RCA. Catalog sales and re-releases generated consistent income for the company for decades, long before his passing. This demonstrated the enduring commercial power of his music and RCA's strategic management of its assets. Elvis had an unparalleled string of hits, especially in the 1950s and early 60s. These songs didn't just sell once, they continued to sell year after year. Teenagers who grew up with Elvis would later introduce his music to their children. His songs became staples of popular culture, played on radio stations and in films, keeping them relevant. RCA was smart about how it managed this catalog. They would regularly compile greatest hits albums, which were always strong sellers. Albums like Elvis's Golden Records, volumes 1 through 5, released over many years, were hugely successful. These compilations allowed RCA to package existing, proven hits into new products, generating fresh sales with minimal new recording costs. Re-releases were another key strategy. As music formats evolved, RCA would re-release Elvis's music. From 78s to 45s, then LPs, then compact cassettes, and eventually compact discs, each new format presented an opportunity to sell the same music again to new and existing fans. Each technological leap meant a new wave of sales. When stereo became common, RCA would often release electronically reprocessed stereo versions of his older mono recordings, giving them a new lease on life. The cost for RCA to manage catalog sales was relatively low compared to producing new music. The recording costs were long recouped. The primary expenses were manufacturing, distribution, and minimal marketing. The profit margins on these sales were therefore very healthy. Catalog sales also provided a stable baseline income for RCA. Even when new Elvis albums weren't charting as high, or during periods when he was less active, the back catalog kept bringing in money. It was a reliable source of revenue that required little ongoing creative input from the artist. RCA also licensed Elvis's songs for use in films, television shows, and commercials. Every time an Elvis song was used, RCA, as the master recording owner, would receive licensing fees. This added another layer of passive income to the catalog. These fees could be substantial, especially for popular, iconic tracks. This strategy of actively managing and remarketing the back catalog turned Elvis's discography into a long-term financial asset. It ensured that the music he recorded in his prime continued to generate revenue for RCA long into his career and beyond, proving the value of intellectual property in the music business. What we still do not know, what percentage of RCA's annual revenue from Elvis came from catalog sales versus new releases during the late 1960s and early 1970s. Did RCA track how many times a fan purchased the same Elvis song across different formats, e.g., LP, cassette, CD? How did RCA decide which Elvis tracks to license for commercials And what were the typical fees? Number 6. What was the massive economic aftermath of Elvis's posthumous sales for RCA? The death of Elvis Presley on August 16, 1977 was a seismic event, not just culturally but economically for RCA. While his passing was tragic, it triggered an unprecedented surge in record sales, turning his legacy into an even greater posthumous goldmine for the company. The aftermath was immense. Within days of his death, RCA Records plants around the world went into overdrive. The demand for Elvis's music skyrocketed. Retailers couldn't keep his albums and singles in stock. RCA had to recall records from their cutout bins, discounted, unsold inventory, and rush them back into production. They literally couldn't press records fast enough to meet the demand. In the months immediately following his death, sales of Elvis's records exploded. My Way, a single released posthumously, became a top 20 hit. His greatest hits compilations and classic albums sold millions more copies. Elvis, A Legendary Performer Volume 3, released in 1978, quickly went platinum. It wasn't just existing fans buying, a new generation was discovering his music. This phenomenon continued for years. RCA released numerous compilations, unreleased live recordings, and studio outtakes. They dug deep into the vaults, turning previously unreleased material into new, highly profitable albums. The Elvis Aaron Presley box set in 1980 was a prime example, selling hundreds of thousands of copies. The economic impact for RCA was staggering. Revenue from Elvis's catalog sales post-1977 reached hundreds of millions of dollars, probably even billions over the decades. His estate received royalties, but RCA owned the master recordings, so they were the primary beneficiaries of the sales boom. This established a new paradigm for posthumous sales in the music industry. In RCA's strategic management of the Elvis catalog post-1977 involved careful curation and timing of releases. They understood the ongoing demand. They kept his music relevant by ensuring it was always available and by regularly introducing new packages like anniversary editions and themed compilations. The advent of new formats like CDs in the 1980s and digital downloads later on provided even more opportunities for RCA to resell his entire discography. This posthumous explosion cemented Elvis's status as the biggest-selling solo artist of all time. His death, while a personal tragedy, transformed him into an eternal commercial entity. For RCA, it validated their initial investment many times over and ensured a continuous, robust revenue stream that lasted for generations. His legacy continues to be one of the most valuable assets in RCA's music catalog. What we still do not know: what was the precise dollar value of RCA's sales increase in the immediate 6 months after Elvis's death? Did RCA have a specific team or strategy in place for posthumous sales before Elvis's passing, or was it developed reactively? How much did RCA profit from the initial reselling of cut-out bin records following the demand surge in 1977? Number 5. How did Colonel Parker's management deal shape RCA's profitability? And Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, was a singular force in the music industry. His management style and contractual demands significantly shaped RCA's profitability with Elvis, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. Parker was a master negotiator, and his famous 50% cut of Elvis's earnings became legendary, impacting how much was left for everyone else, including RCA. From early on, Parker insisted on a 50% commission on all of Elvis's entertainment earnings: records, films, merchandise, live performances. This was an extraordinarily high percentage for a manager, where 10 to 20% was more typical. This meant that for every dollar Elvis earned as an artist, Parker got 50 cents. This left less for Elvis, and also influenced RCA's calculations. RCA dealt with Parker directly. He was the gatekeeper to Elvis. Any contract negotiations for recording, royalties, or advances went through the Colonel. His tough negotiating tactics meant that over the years, as Elvis's star power grew, Parker successfully pushed RCA for better royalty rates for Elvis and larger advances. Each increase in Elvis's royalty rate directly cut into RCA's profit margin per record. However, Parker was also instrumental in making Elvis a money-making machine. He secured the RCA deal in the first place, then pushed for the lucrative film contracts, the TV specials, and the Vegas residencies. All of these ventures, while expensive for Elvis due to Parker's cut, generated immense revenue for RCA through record and soundtrack sales. Parker's relentless drive to keep Elvis in the public eye meant a constant stream of product for RCA to sell. The publishing rights deal, where Parker and Elvis received a co-publishing share, was another example of Parker diverting potential earnings away from the traditional record company songwriter structure. While RCA wasn't directly losing publishing revenue as they weren't the primary publisher, the fact that Parker and Elvis were so heavily incentivized to record songs they co-owned influenced the material RCA recorded, often for better sales. Parker's iron-fisted control over Elvis's career ensured consistency. RCA knew what they were getting with Elvis, a superstar whose career was meticulously managed for maximum commercial output. This reliability was valuable for RCA. They could plan releases, marketing campaigns, and production schedules with confidence. Ultimately, Parker's 50% cut meant that while Elvis earned an unprecedented fortune, much of that fortune was split with his manager, and RCA had to factor this into their artist agreements. While Parker drove Elvis's commercial success, his financial demands often squeezed the profit pie for other stakeholders, including RCA's negotiations over royalty rates. He was a partner in creating the economic behemoth that was Elvis Presley, but a very expensive partner. What we still do not know, did RCA ever attempt to negotiate directly with Elvis, bypassing Colonel Parker, and what were the outcomes? How much did RCA estimate they paid out to Elvis in increased royalties over the decades due to Parker's aggressive negotiations? Did RCA ever feel that Parker's 50% cut of Elvis's earnings created a disincentive for Elvis to demand even higher royalties from RCA? Number 4. How did legal and contractual negotiations impact RCA's financial landscape with Elvis? RCA's financial relationship with Elvis Presley was dynamic, not static. It involved numerous legal and contractual negotiations over the decades, each with financial implications for the company. These negotiations determined royalty rates, advances, and the scope of RCA's rights, directly impacting their profitability. The initial 1955 contract set the baseline, but as Elvis's star power grew exponentially, Colonel Parker quickly moved to renegotiate. His first major renegotiation in 1956 significantly increased Elvis's royalty rate from 3% to 5% wholesale, and also increased his advances. This meant RCA was paying out more per record, directly cutting into their per unit profit. However, they understood that keeping a happy, highly successful artist was more valuable than clinging to an outdated contract. These renegotiations became a regular feature throughout Elvis's career. Each time Parker would leverage Elvis's immense popularity and commercial success to secure better terms, higher royalty rates, larger upfront payments, advances, and sometimes even larger percentages on foreign sales or specific types of releases like soundtracks. RCA agreed to these terms because Elvis was consistently their top-selling artist, a cash machine. The cost of losing Elvis, or having a disgruntled Elvis, was far greater than giving him a bigger slice of the pie. During Elvis's time in the Army, Parker negotiated a new contract that included a massive $125,000 advance per year for 5 years starting in 1960. This was an unprecedented sum at the time. This meant RCA was committing substantial funds up front, which they would recoup from future record sales. It was a huge financial commitment, but a necessary one to retain their biggest asset. The film contracts also involved complex negotiations. While the film studios paid Elvis for his acting, the music component involved RCA. And agreements had to be made about how many songs Elvis would record per film, who would cover the recording costs, and how the soundtrack album would be promoted. These intricate deals ensured that RCA maintained control over the music, which was their core business. These legal battles, though rare with Elvis himself, could also be costly. Disputes over song credits, intellectual property, or even unauthorized recordings could lead to legal fees and potential settlements. While RCA generally avoided such public conflicts with Elvis, the contractual framework was designed to protect their investment. Every time RCA signed a new deal or renegotiated an old one, their financial landscape with Elvis shifted. They had to weigh the immediate costs of higher royalties or bigger advances against the projected future earnings. Their willingness to adapt and invest more in Elvis was a testament to his undeniable economic power and their long-term strategic vision for their biggest artist. These negotiations were not just legal formalities, they were critical economic decisions. What we still do not know is RCA's total estimated legal spend related to Elvis's various contracts and negotiations over his career. Did RCA ever have a specific cap on how much they were willing to increase Elvis's royalty rate during renegotiations? What impact did these constant renegotiations have on the morale or compensation of other artists on RCA's roster? Number 3, how did technological shifts affect RCA's investment and returns from Elvis? The music industry is constantly shaped by technological change, and RCA's investment and returns from Elvis were directly influenced by these shifts. From the transition to new record formats to the rise of television, each technological leap presented both challenges and opportunities for RCA. When RCA first signed Elvis, the primary formats were 78 RPM and 45 RPM singles, and 3313 RPM LPs were gaining traction. RCA, as a major record manufacturer, had to invest in the machinery to press these different formats. The shift from bulky 78s to the more convenient 45s, which Elvis largely defined, meant new pressing plants and distribution logistics. This was a significant capital investment. The rise of stereophonic sound in the late 1950s and early 1960s was another major technological shift. RCA, already a leader in electronics, embraced stereo. They invested heavily in new stereo recording equipment for their studios. This meant new microphones, multi-track recorders, and mixing consoles. For Elvis, this meant new recording sessions in stereo, and importantly, the ability to re-release his earlier mono recordings in electronically reprocessed stereo. This allowed RCA to effectively resell his entire catalog, creating a fresh revenue stream for existing material. Television was perhaps the biggest technological influence on Elvis's early career. RCA, being the Radio Corporation of America, was deeply involved in television manufacturing RCA Victor televisions. They understood the power of the new medium. Elvis's iconic TV appearances in 1956, especially on The Ed Sullivan Show, directly correlated with massive record sales spikes. RCA leveraged its corporate ties to NBC, also part of RCA, to get Elvis on these shows, recognizing the unparalleled promotional value. These appearances were essentially multi-million-dollar advertisements for RCA's records. Later, the move from vinyl to cassette tapes in the 1970s, and then to compact discs, CDs in the 1980s, provided RCA with repeated opportunities to repackage and resell Elvis's entire discography. Each new format brought improved sound quality and convenience, spurring consumers to buy their favorite albums again. And RCA invested in the mastering and manufacturing capabilities for these new formats, turning Elvis's timeless music into consistent revenue across technological cycles. Digital music, streaming services, and downloads in the 21st century continued this trend. RCA, or its successor companies, have continued to benefit from Elvis's catalog being available on every new platform. These technological shifts required continuous investment from RCA, but they consistently yielded returns by expanding market reach and offering new ways for consumers to access and purchase Elvis's music. Elvis's career paralleled the evolution of music consumption technology, and RCA was always there to profit from it. What we still do not know. What was RCA's largest single capital expenditure related to a technological shift for Elvis's music, e.g. stereo equipment, CD mastering? How did RCA measure the increase in sales for Elvis's catalog when it was re-released on a new format like CD? Did RCA's television division benefit from the increased sale of RCA Victor TVs due to Elvis's appearances, and was that ever quantified? Number 2, how did Elvis Presley's brand valuation and cultural capital benefit RCA's bottom line? Beyond the direct sales figures, Elvis Presley built an immense amount of brand valuation and cultural capital, which indirectly but powerfully boosted RCA's bottom line. His status as an icon transcended music sales, making him a perpetual asset for the company. This intangible value had very tangible financial benefits. Elvis was more than just an artist, he was a cultural phenomenon. His name became synonymous with rock and roll. This meant that simply being associated with Elvis carried weight for RCA. When RCA released an Elvis record, it wasn't just another product, it was an event. This brand recognition made marketing easier and more effective. It gave RCA a halo effect, associating them with the biggest name in music. His cultural capital meant that Elvis's music would remain relevant for generations. His songs became part of the collective memory, played at weddings, in movies, and on classic rock radio stations. This ensured a continuous demand for his catalog, underpinning RCA's long-term revenue stream from his recordings. The enduring power of his image and music kept the money flowing. RCA also benefited from Elvis's unique selling proposition. He wasn't just a singer, he was a revolutionary figure. This made his music appealing to a wide demographic, crossing racial and class lines in ways few artists had before. This broad appeal translated into massive sales volumes, which was the core of RCA's profit. The sheer volume of his hits, his unique vocal style, and his charismatic personality created an unparalleled legacy. This legacy continued to attract new fans long after his death, who then delved into his extensive discography. RCA, as the owner of these masters, benefited from every new discovery. Elvis's cultural capital also made him a valuable licensing asset. While Colonel Parker managed most direct merchandising, RCA was the master recording owner. This meant that any commercial or film that wanted to use an Elvis song had to license it from RCA. These sync licenses could generate significant fees, adding to RCA's revenue. The higher Elvis's cultural standing, the more valuable these licenses became. His brand valuation also played a role in RCA's own corporate identity. Being the label that signed Elvis was a point of pride and a marketing tool for RCA themselves. It helped them attract other artists and solidified their position as a major player in the evolving music industry. The economic ripple effect of having such an iconic figure on their roster extended far beyond his individual record sales. And Elvis was a gold standard, and RCA owned that gold. What we still do not know, did RCA ever formally quantify the intangible brand value of Elvis Presley to their overall corporate image? How did RCA leverage Elvis's cultural capital to attract or sign other prominent artists during his peak? What was the estimated cumulative value of licensing fees RCA received for Elvis's music and media beyond direct record sales? Number one, what was RCA's overall market impact and dominance? Thanks to Elvis. Elvis Presley didn't just make money for RCA, he fundamentally shifted their position in the music market. His success allowed RCA to achieve unparalleled market impact and dominance, especially in the burgeoning rock and roll genre. This transformed RCA from a traditional powerhouse into a leader in the new musical landscape. Before Elvis, RCA Victor was a respected label, known for classical music, crooners, and country artists. They were big, but they weren't necessarily the cutting edge of youth culture. Signing Elvis changed all that overnight. It signaled that RCA was willing to take risks and embrace the future. This move put them at the forefront of the rock and roll revolution. Elvis's consistent string of #1 hits and multi-million selling albums meant RCA dominated the record charts throughout the late 1950s and early 1960s. He was a hit-making machine, and every hit boosted RCA's overall market share. This dominance was visible in trade publications like Billboard, where RCA records often occupied multiple top spots, many of them by Elvis. His success allowed RCA to attract other talented artists. Being the label that signed Elvis was a powerful statement. Artists would see RCA's ability to turn a regional act into a global phenomenon and want to be part of that success. This created a positive feedback loop, solidifying RCA's position. RCA's massive distribution network was crucial, but Elvis's demand made that network even more efficient and profitable. The volume of records they were pressing and shipping for Elvis meant that their logistics operations were working at peak capacity, spreading costs over an enormous output. Economically, Elvis's dominance meant that RCA was consistently generating enormous cash flow. This allowed them to invest in other areas, develop new technologies, and expand their operations. He was a cornerstone of their financial health for decades. Even during the British invasion, when many American artists struggled, Elvis, backed by RCA, remained a strong seller, ensuring RCA maintained a solid market presence. The economic impact extended beyond just record sales. Elvis's influence propelled RCA's entire corporate brand. RCA Victor radios, televisions, and other electronics benefited from the association with the biggest star in the world. It was a synergy that bolstered the entire RCA empire. In essence, Elvis provided RCA with a unique, enduring competitive advantage. He was a one-of-a-kind artist who became the benchmark for commercial success in music. RCA's acquisition of Elvis was perhaps the most astute business decision in the history of the popular music industry, not just for the direct profits, but for the profound and lasting market impact and dominance it conferred upon the company for generations. He wasn't just an artist on their roster, he was the foundation of their modern commercial empire. What we still do not know, how much did RCA's overall market share in the music industry increase specifically due to Elvis's sales in his first 5 years? Did RCA quantify the indirect sales boost to their other products like electronics from Elvis's fame? What was RCA's estimated competitive advantage in signing new artists because they were the label of Elvis Presley.